Hey, welcome back. Let's try some code experiments, try to test things out so that you understand some certain aspects better. So we're working on the with context manager today, and I want you to create a new file and write this code there. This code tries to open this file. The problem is this file does not exist here. There is a file folder, as you see here, files, but there is no docs.txt file. There is a doc.txt file, but there is no docs.txt file. Therefore, whenever I run the script, I'm going to get an error. The error says that the file was not found. And of course, that can be fixed by pointing to the right file path. In my case, it is files/doc.txt. You see, I have this file here. So if you want the code to work, you need that file to exist. In my case, I also need to add these dots in front. As I explained earlier, these dots are useful when the Python file is somewhere in a directory and the external text file is outside of that directory. So in my case, my Python file is inside experiments and the doc.txt file is in files here. This time the code will work fine. There we go, we didn't get any output because we didn't print this out. So that was the first thing I wanted to show you, that file paths need to exist when you open a file in read mode. The next thing I want you to try is, I want you to remove this argument. So remove it and keep only the first argument. And run the code. So there are no errors. And of course you can print out the content of the file, and you get the content successfully, so all carrots are to be sliced longitudinally. That's the content of this file. So why is it still working? Well, that's because by default the open function assigns an R value to the mode's argument. So you can open a Python console and check the help for open. Scroll up to the top and you'll see that the mode's argument is by default set to R. So you'll see some programmers just use this version when they want to read a file, and then if they want to write, they use this version with a write argument. So when you want to write a file, then you have to use W. With R, it's up to your personal preference. So not mentioning the argument makes the code shorter, but some would argue that having the argument value there is better because it makes the code more explicit, so you can read the code better as a programmer. For Python it's the same. The next experiment, let's try to print out here anything like hello. Run the code. You get hello printed out, obviously because the with context manager first opens the file and then it executes whatever it finds in here. So the with context manager doesn't actually force you to have a file read method here. But of course you do want to have that. So, but my point here is that if you decide to have file read outside the with context manager, so you see I unindented here, this is not inside the with block anymore, so if I run the code now, we're going to get an error. It points to line 3, you can click there, takes you to line 3. in the read method. That's a problem. So we're operating on a closed file because, as I taught you, the with context manager opens the file, and then once the block of code ends execution, so once the indented code block ends execution, then the file is closed implicitly. And then the interpreter goes on and executes the other lines. Now notice that this is not a problem with a variable. So the variable still exists. File is a variable and it does exist. But that variable at this point is associated with a closed file. Up to here it is associated with an open file, but now the file is closed, so you cannot read a closed file. That's the idea here. So to fix this, of course, you need to cut that and put it inside the with block. And lastly, the last thing I want you to try is that you already know this, but I wanted to emphasize this, that once you assign the variable to the file read method, then you can use the variable as many times as you want. So you run the scripts and the variable will be printed out as many times as there are print functions in here. This wouldn't be the case though if you had two file.read methods, as I explained earlier. So I also wanted to mention this again. Be careful with this because many people are just confused and they cannot find out why the program doesn't behave as they expected. So in this case we don't get any output. That's because the string is first created in here by the read method, and then the read method is exhausted. So the second time it returns an empty string because, as I explained, the first time the read method reads the string up to here, the content of the text file, it reads it up to here, and then if you execute the read method again, it tries to read whatever is at the end here. So there's nothing always, so that's why you get an empty string. So the second time this outputs an empty string, and the empty string is stored in here, so we are printing out an empty string each time. That's why we get nothing here. That's about the experiments for today. Thanks a lot.